All right. So it is my pleasure to introduce the first speaker of three phenomenal people, all of whom I have academic crushes on. Kevin Redmond, first canoe trip memory was his first summer at St. John's YMCA camp as a counselor in training. A couple years later, he was sent to the CRCA, and he said, "I got good." Things got interesting in 1976 when he attended Candelore during Kirk Whipper days, including paddling the legendary Kootenai canoe. In exchange for Kevin's hand-carved balsam fir paddle, he received from Kirk two paddle blanks. Kevin has paddled most of provinces in Canada, but not yet the territories, although I think after today and yet last night it's on the list. Yeah. So he's looking for paddle partners in the Northwest Territories if you're looking. He's working on a piled higher and deeper, for those who don't know, PhD. And once he finishes that, he's really looking forward to traveling the 450 kilometers down the Churchill in Labrador before the Muskrat Falls is dammed. This summer, he plans to paddle only 1,000 kilometers, including some of Ontario's longer and easier trips, and he definitely would like to talk to you about that as well. You're going to be very busy at break. When I asked him, he says he believes that canoeing opens a whole new world, from people to places, experiences, personal growth, and development, and it's social, personal, and private, or as he says, it's awesome. I want to talk just about a personal story about his presentation. I had the opportunity and pleasure to meet him this fall at the Council for Outdoor Educators of Ontario, where we were presenters at the same place. And I attended this, and I was moved truly beyond words. It helped me reflect on the importance of place and how it really informs who we are as an identity. And I can tell you it really made me really consider more deeply on the development of community and the interconnectedness of Canadians, maybe because we are so far apart or because we are so far apart. And also it helped me revisit my shallow understanding of our history as it relates to displacement of communities, including and especially the First Nations people and the original people of this land. So without further ado, I'd like you to help me welcome Kevin Redmond to the podium.
Thank you very much, Erica. It's very humbling, and humbling too in respect of all the previous speakers. I would say that Jason, in his previous presentation, identified a new definition of a northern trap line. And it's just as a prelude to this presentation, you can put the music up, please. In terms of my background and this here, I'm in the process of hopefully completing my PhD this spring. But I wouldn't consider myself a hardened academic, and there's some academic components to this, but it's more based on my experiences and growth, personal growth, through paddling and paddling experiences that has led me to this presentation. So that there's kind of a little bit about it. In terms of this here, this church is in St. Cairns in Placentia Bay, Newfoundland, if we can turn out the lights. And it's a little background. Between 1954 and 1974, there was over 300 communities abandoned at the behest of the Newfoundland government. Over 30,000 people displaced from their home communities to places where they were centralized in larger urban type communities. And Malcolm Gladwell, in his book David and Goliath, speaks of it's amazing how two people can go through the exact same experience, and for one it is empowering, and for the other it is the antithesis. It destroys him. It's paralyzing. And I think that the same happened here when we look at the first presentation last night of the Inuit, the First Nations in Northern Canada, leaving home and the sense of loss from home, etc. And that there is the genesis and the theme that will run through this presentation. So that church was abandoned approximately 50 years ago. Can you put the music up a bit? Up a little bit. That's good. Can you hear me okay over the music? Just raise your hand in the back. Okay, thanks. It's amazing what you get when you marry someone. And I grew up in an urban community of St. John's. My wife grew up in coastal Labrador. She's the same age as me. Her hair's not my color. But she grew up with no road, no electricity, traditional. Her great-great-grandfather was a stowaway from England, etc. And her aunt, Amelia Earhart, is her godmother. Anyways, so because of Mary and Sophia, I came into a lot of the rural Newfoundland experiences that I probably wouldn't have otherwise had. Thinking about place, this here is Isle Vallon, and it's not often that we give back to the natural world. And this is a house that's being reclaimed. It was abandoned and now in a state of reclamation, and it's a giving back of us humans to the natural world. It's now feeding the natural. So as we paddle our canoe routes, etc., sometimes we want to consider, or I consider, is it we that define the human condition, or is it the places that define us? This is from a Royal Commission in Newfoundland on strengthening the position of Newfoundland in Canada. And so our heritage is influenced. It influences us, and we also help shape it. And Brand notes that we're not born into a void. We are born into our heritage. And I told James last night I was going to cite him. And this is very true. People's identity is very much tied to self or to place. So in urban communities, we conform to normative behaviors and expectations, and it loses some of our connection with the natural world. And I was listening to CBC just this week, and it was really interesting how there was a researcher in New York who was speaking of urban communities, and they were saying how people step back from interaction with people, whereas in these communities that were abandoned, everyone knew everyone. Now, they also knew everything about everyone else. There's one person not smiling right here. That's my little brother. Okay, this is me, by the way. And I was fortunate, even though I lived in an urban area, that we did do things outside. And I think that the nature piece, even outside, even weather, experiencing weather in an urban community is still, I think, very formative and potentially transformative. So Seaman speaks of every lived experience can be categorized or fit into a movement, a rest, or encounter. Yager, 1975, he puts it in two categories of mundane and festive. And these are just a couple of little examples. In Missile Joe's, we saw a sheer proximity to nature's power going into Grey River. It's humbling, but it's also potentially transformative. And when we endow a place with value, then it becomes place and not space. And I think here Van Manen speaks to, it's us giving new life to what we take for granted. We go through our daily lives and we take everything for granted, but it's when it's pricked that we stop and we consider. So displacement is a global phenomena, and we've seen that already in some of the presentations. But yet its effects are really felt locally. The effects of it are intimate in local areas. Newfoundland and Labrador is a coastal place, over 17,000 kilometers of coastline. It was developed based on coast because it had access to rich resources. There was no second economy other than fishery until into the 20th century in Newfoundland and Labrador. So it was over 300 communities. Most of it, this is Placentia Bay right here, and then this here is the route that I'll speak to later on in terms of where I took the participants for my research for my PhD. And so all of the red dots are communities that were resettled, and which means that the people left the communities. So I wonder, when they take the house with them, which they did in some cases, is that taking home with you? Or is it the place that you left, where the home was, that is the foundation of home and our sense of dwelling? This is pushed through. If Missile Joe is here, they stopped and put in this place on their journey. And so this is what it used to look like. Basically third world conditions, no plumbing, no electricity, very little schooling, if any. They had a church. And the priest ruled the place, etc. And this is what it was only 50 years ago. It's not very long ago when you look at that and you consider it. A peasant economy, which means very little money, and a producer economy, which means that people produced. They did everything from the source to the use. So they sourced the materials, they made the product, they used the product, they refined the product, just like the canoe. And the government, they didn't tell them that they absolutely had to go, but yes, if they didn't move, they got no money. There was coercion in it, etc. In terms of my expertise, it's not First Nations, but I know that the First Nations in Hebron in northern Labrador were completely misled in terms of moving out of there, etc. This here, Missile Joe paddled past Bay de Lou, just east of Burgeo. And so for me, the genesis of my interest in this here basically began as a paddler and a canoeist. Now you're probably wondering, am I the little guy in this or the big guy? Yeah, and I'm the big guy, but my hair is a different color. So I started out as a canoeist. I did the senior instructor and instructor trainer and blah, 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 all that with Paddle Canada and CRCA. And it led me beyond where I was, and it was exploratory. And I think everyone in this room can testify to experiences that have made paddling transformative for them. And the interesting thing with canoeing is that, at least home in Newfoundland and Labrador, is that it's inland journeys. So you're dealing with interiors, and it's not so much the coastline. You have wildlife. This image here and the next one were taken probably within about 2 minutes. And and then as the black bear was coming toward us, it's kind of interesting with the previous presentation about the black bears. There was 4 of us there, and we were deciding who could run the fastest or who was the slowest. Yeah. Canoeing in, sometimes you do things differently. You have to be creative. The chopper pilot was going to sling it, but then he said, well, I think I can do it this way. And so that's the way we did it. This is the main river, a heritage river in Newfoundland, Labrador. It's got a canyon, 23 kilometers with class 2 and 3 rapids. This is Lynn Knoll in the bow, and I'm in the stern. By the way, all these images are mine except for a couple with like this one. And I nip and tuck on rapids, so but I did learn on glass, so on fiberglass, so it's as opposed to plastic. People that learn first on plastic, they're a little rougher around the rocks generally. And this here is the Bay de Nord, which is another heritage river in central Newfoundland, and this is the headwaters here. So why sea kayak? In 1984, the rotomolded sea kayak came on the scene. And so why would you want a sea kayak? Well, there's no portages. Very rarely is there a portage. And what else? You get up early in the morning, and the wind picks up in the afternoon, so that's when you stop. And it's a great time for a nap. What goes on the road stays on the road. But it's interesting. And in the coastal areas, you would come upon these things because of places that are abandoned. Then you come to things and places that are different. And this is an old skidoo, original skidoo, that was abandoned in Julie's Harbor. And it was just left there. The graveyard there, the mature trees, 50 years old, growing up through it. But it gives you opportunity, all right, paddling, to experience place and take an intimate look and to look below the surface and what you normally take for granted. Also, when the ocean, wildlife is bigger, there's also a sense of intimacy. And this is a whale having a poo, you know. And it's a dynamic place, it changes. And ultimately, it's about our sense of wonder and searching for understanding and new ways of understanding and seeing things. Yeah. This is in Northern Labrador and Voisey's Bay. I've added a few of these in here to my regular presentation. There's a bit of mystery and mastery here. There's mystery for the visitor, because you don't know, and you don't know the whole story, but you're curious. Whereas there's mastery for the people that were here before, and this is a tent ring. There's converging cultures. This is Gilbert Hay. He's been on the cover of Time magazine. And then you have over here Icelandic poppies that were brought by Moravian missionaries. Gilbert's table, I should go back one. In my conversation with Gilbert, we were talking about time and everything else, and differences of southern cultures and northern cultures. And then he went and said to me point blank, he said, "Who has the gray hair?" and I was 10 years younger than him. Yeah. Battle Harbor, awesome place. And it's illumination by contrast. What happens is that when we experience these places of difference, then it illuminates and highlights what it is that we are and what we experience. This is in the salt shed in Battle Harbor. You can see the salt still leaching out from the nails. And this is where Robert Peary had his news conference after he supposedly reached North Pole. You can see the Bible in Battle Harbor where they changed the name of the king. So when the king passed on, then they went through the whole Bible and changed the name. So it was read right. This is a 20-minute walk, Magic Cove. And this gentleman right here was born in this house just 100 feet from this other one. And this is next door. This is what's left. And he's the only person, him and his wife, who lived there in the summer. You thimble tickle head, you come into a shore, it was getting stormy, we were in a sea kayak, and we came in, and all of a sudden you see lilac trees. Non-native, you know that there's a human presence that was there. Harbor Laku on the southwest coast. This is a living community, 5 kilometers away, petite, resettled in 2002. So this is the guy that was not smiling in the family picture earlier. He's smiling now. And this is Grand Brett. These are 3 doctors. So that's not why I'm doing my PhD, But it was interesting. We came to Grand Brett, and then one of the doctors, when they were looking at the map before we got there, suggested, well, maybe we can paddle upstream. This community here, we were there before it was abandoned, but it was abandoned in 2010. And I would put this on a must-see. If there's anyone from Adventure Canada, I think it's a mistake to pass by this place. It has the Cram-A-Lot Inn, which is about a 10 by 10 little inn, and it means like cram a lot of people in. That there is what the name means. So we camped in the community. We had the 3 doctors there who were here to play, and then all of a sudden there was a lineup outside of the clinic, and not because the doctors were here, but because the nurse was showing up for 10 o'clock in the chopper right here. And this is what the doctors were doing while the nurse was doing her work. And that there was their mark on the world. And sometimes, it's a question of what is the mark that we leave on the world And we look at that, and it's kind of interesting looking at the conversation of Inukshuk's and that earlier. This here is something that, in human terms, when you look in these abandoned places, it makes you question, what is the mark that we leave in this world? Because in human terms, when you put that in geological or cosmological terms, it's very, very fleeting. We were invited in for breakfast, and this here is the morning we left. Round Harbour, and this is the view from inside of that house. It's over 100 years old, abandoned. 1907, that's the wallpaper. The Edison phonograph, that's inside of the house. The quality of the woodwork that was made there, but it's left. And how hard is that to leave, and what does it mean to leave that? Is that leaving the foundation of our dwelling and our being behind? Is there really no place like home? What is it like to abandon home? You look at rural communities now. Corbett says, or House, I'm sorry, says that in rural communities, in many places, the road to education leads out of town because it's all about leaving. The rationale, I'll just mention quickly, this is our youngest daughter. She's now 20 and a musician, violinist and voice. And Susan, she's 22. She was working at the European Space Agency in the fall with the comet landing, etc. And this is Labrador, and these are raised beachheads. So at the last ice age, when it receded, then the earth rebounded. So this used to be a beach, and this used to be a beach where the little swale is in the thing. So the bottom line is place matters. You come in this room and you find a nice place, and you end up with what we call a nesting syndrome. You find a place that's comfortable for you. When we build our homes, we tend them, we cultivate, we dwell, etc. Dichotomy of resettlement. There's some places that have something and some places that have nothing. Others are now a new age coastal cottage country. My research, I'll just go through this quickly. The foundations of it are based in lived experiences. It's subjective. It's not scientific. The opinions and the impressions of the individual are what are valued. It's only accomplished by doing. It's through lived experience, and it's looking at lived experience that is not that is normally taken for granted, and going back and looking at the pre-reflective. Its purpose is to gain a new understanding or a deeper understanding, and to question the way we see the world. So we had a couple of hours with 9 killer whales here, and it was this guy here was named Scratch Dude. I started shooting with a zoom lens. I had to put on a wide-angle lens. The 4 existentials of my research in terms of how I look at things are lived space or spatiality and home, relationality, the relations where we have with people and also with place, corporality, which is the body and embodied experiences, and temporality. And so most people think in terms of clock time, but yet when you're sick, time is slow. When you're excited and things are good, time is fast. And that there is meaningful. That's not clock time. And more importantly, are in some ways, I think, are rhythms and cycles. And these existentials are differentiated, but not separated. King's Point, this is beluga whale. I think someone maybe spoke about that. The approach, we did it by boat. For my research, I was intending to do a sea kayak trip, but just giving in logistics for everyone, we did it by boat. Could we have the music again, Mark, please? So we started from Petit Fort, and ironically, Petit Fort resisted resettlement. And so what I'm going to do now is I'll take you through what I took my participants through, which was a one-day excursion. We went in boat 25 kilometers to Isle of Val, remnants of fishing community here that's current, coastal cottage country, biological reclamation. This is all in Isle of Val. and this is the Isle of Ballintickle. And this here can get pretty rough right here, based on the tide going in and out. St. Leonard's, made famous in song at home. Not much from the distance, it doesn't look like much, but it's Buckley talks of harmony of counterpoint, and E. Fouton speaks of polarizing values and encounters. And I'll speak to that in a minute. So this is in St. Leonard's, remnants of road. They built everything, did everything themselves. So is it the unsettlement of humanity when you take people out from their home? Do we now, because people are denatured and don't have nature, experience in nature, do we take them from the urban cities and cast them back into nature? And this is the inside of St. Leonard's. And once you get inside, you can see why they lived there. So Isle of Allen is right here, St. Leonard's is here, and there's a 2-kilometer stretch that you can walk between here and St. Kieran's. St. Kieran's is where the church was, the initial one. And this is called the Blue Road. This participant right here, he said in his interview that when he was leaving here, he felt really unsettled. It wasn't fear, but he didn't know why. You get a kilometer in, and this is what you come to. A stone church, remnants of a stone church. These here were made in Ireland, numbered, and sent to Newfoundland. The rocks were quarried in Newfoundland. Abandoned, this here is probably close to 100 years old. That's what it used to be. In the middle of nowhere, 25 kilometers, a minimum of 25 kilometers from nowhere, that there is what was. Built with free labor. And then in the forest, in the middle of the forest, is the graveyard. And in the interview the other day on CBC, the guy said, home is where you keep the dead. And I thought that was an interesting perspective. Sorry. Seashells, nautilus shells. So obviously that was something that was meaningful to that individual. Right here is Annie Sullivan, who taught for 40 years, and Thomas Sullivan, who was sent to St. John's to go to one of the premier schools in St. John's, St. Bonaventure's College, and died while he was at school at 18 years old. And it was very striking and moving to me. It is to me even today. This gate, imagine the pride that they had when it was first there. It was probably the first one on the coast, a steel gate. And now, what is it? It's left. Fiddlesticks of a forest. Interestingly, the participants, even though we were in a group, they all spoke of individual siloed experiences. A holy well, just down a short ways from the church, and the water still springs from it, and some of the participants actually drank from it. And I wouldn't, I was afraid of getting giardia. Then you come to the end of the Blue Road, and you can't see it when you're down in the forest, but then you come out to this. And this is what it used to look like. Built in 1921, cornerstone. Incredible woodwork. Phenomenal, there was no glass. None at all on the ground. In the church, no glass. Probably because they took it with them, because it was a very valuable commodity. And that bay there, actually it's a harbor. It goes approximately 5 to 7 kilometers. This is just looking out through. May 17th, 2006. Love you, Mom. The bell tower and the bell gone. A lot of them never had a watch, and the sound of the chime of the bell would likely be their timepiece on Sunday morning. This was a mine in here, they call it the oven. And this is a geological feature, synclinal folds. Great paradise. And it's interesting with all of the space, how everything is put together and close. Right here, there was a grandfather and his granddaughter from Edmonton there for the weekend, the only ones in the community. Great paradise. A reunion that weekend, and people from all over the world. There's no electricity but one street light. Round these rocks you laughed and played, our memory here of you have stayed. From a little girl into a lady grew, now our blessed lady watches over you. This here was abandoned, and inside a purse. In the world of modern day privacy, and it's abandoned, do we have the right to go in and look inside that church? Pedagogically, we look at curiosity and wanting to know things, and it's a real poignant time or consideration. So this here is Great Paradise, has its own, it remains as a community, but as cottages only. Interesting, on this trip, this guy, the two people in the red, found out that they were related. Bergio. And this is Grand Brett. And one final thing I'd like to say is that, like many of the experiences in all of the presentations that are here today, they're very formative and transformative, provocative and evocative experiences. And ultimately, they stay with the person, whereby it's like a bell that has been sounded. It cannot be unrung, and it changes your world and your sense of being forever. Thank you.